Hi, everyone, and welcome to Heal Endometriosis Naturally with Wendy K Laidlaw. Wendy has spent the last 2 years helping women with various stages of endometriosis to heal naturally after putting her condition into remission. After her own healing success from stage 4 endometriosis and adenomyosis, she's inspired to heal others, and her goal is to help some of the 175 million women know that there is another way other than painkillers, drugs, or surgery. This is the place to be for real talk with real people for real results, so you can learn how to heal your endometriosis naturally. Please note that the opinions expressed in this program may represent options, but are not a substitute for proper medical care. Before starting any new healthcare program, we recommend you consult with a health professional.
Hey everyone, it's Wendy K Laidlaw here from Heal Endometriosis Naturally. I hope that this podcast and video finds you well today. I'm so excited to have with me Jessi Jean, who is with me today. She is a food psychologist, or rather eating psychological coach. I'm sure I've probably got that all wrong. But anyway, my point of having her on is she's got a really important message to do with food. And it's something that, you know, we need to survive. We need to, for our bodies to heal and to function. And she's got a really unique and wonderful way of addressing that. And that's why I thought for women with endometriosis who are in so much pain and don't often feel like eating, I thought it'd be great to chat with Jean today. But thank you, Jessi, today. I beg your pardon. How are you today, Jessi?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on, Wendy.
Yeah, it's no problem at all. I love what you do. And we've talked before the podcast. And I wonder, before we hear more about what you're doing now, if you could perhaps even just share a little bit about your story, where you began and what's got you to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So my story is the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now is because of my personal history and struggles with food. So I suffered for over 10 years of my life with various food challenges, and those kind of manifested themselves in the form of binge eating, overeating, compulsive overeating, and I felt so alone in those struggles. And I spent so much time trying to figure it out, jumping from, diet to diet, spending years in therapy, going to Overeaters Anonymous, and spending a lot of money in that process as well, trying to figure this out, because it was something that was affecting and permeating into every area of my life. And so by the time I finally crawled out of that 10-year battle, I was so exhausted, and at the same time I was so relieved to finally be on the other side. And also I felt there was such a gap, there was such a missing component that had I known what I finally dug up and was able to figure out and heal myself, I would have gotten over this way sooner. And so I spent time figuring out, how can I help other women navigate these struggles and not spend years tirelessly fighting these cycles, because they're disheartening. They chip away at our self-esteem and our ability to put our energy and intention into other areas of our life. Because when you struggle with food and body worries, it consumes so much mental space, so much mental energy is wasted worrying about these thoughts. And so my goal is to help women get past that and to rewire what's going on in their brain so that they can find complete food freedom and body confidence so that they can live out whatever their purpose is. So my story just really, it was turning pain into purpose and being able to help other women efficiently, because it took me so long to get to this point, and it's unnecessary. And unfortunately, a lot of the traditional approaches to kind of healing these struggles are based in very old research that's still kind of taught and practiced today. And the success rates are very, very low. And so coming in and seeing that there's this gap, I knew that I had to bring this message to women that, hey, you are not a victim of a forceful disorder that you are powerless over. You have so much power in this. You just need the right tools to learn how to navigate these struggles. The crazy thoughts you have with food or the crazy thoughts you have about your body, I know that it feels dark and alone and shameful, but you're not alone, and there is a way out of this. And we just have to work on rewiring the brain and coming back to this place of bliss and balance with food and body, the way that we were born and the way that we were intended. So I ended up going to the Institute for the Psychology of Eating to become an eating psychology coach, so I could help women kind of bridge the gap between nutrition and psychology, but how do we bring those two together and just have this mind-body connection? That's a little bit of my backstory.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. And I think what's great about your own story and you know, what you've created is very much kind of an ilk of, you know, what, you know, sort of mirrors my own sort of
Yeah.
journey, you know, with endometriosis. When you've been in that much pain and you then manage to find a way out, you know, you then want to give back to other people so they don't have to suffer in the same way. So you talk about that pain point. What was the kind of the final kind of crux for you? What was that shift that really, you know, changed your direction?
Yeah, well, I had tried everything. I mean, I literally had tried everything. I went to therapy, different treatments, Overeaters Anonymous, different programs, different diets. I mean, I tried everything to find balance with food. And I remember feeling like, you know what? I think this struggle is just wired into my DNA, that something at birth must have happened for me to have developed this. And I just am going to have to learn to live with it and manage it the rest of my life. And I had heard many people that I had, you know, received help from kind of say things like that, like, yeah, you're gonna have to learn how to manage it. This will be something that you probably deal with your whole life. You're just gonna get better at handling it. And I remember feeling so defeated in those moments. Like, am I really gonna have to deal with this the rest of my life? Like, is this my destiny? Like these weird tendencies with food, these weird impulsive behaviors. And for me, at that point, I really just wanted to give up because I had spent so much energy and so much time trying to figure it out that I was just exhausted. And it was actually one night I remember sitting alone in my room, and I started to think about how one day I wanted to be a mother. And it just took me back to my childhood, actually just playing with dolls and telling my mom, oh, I'm going to name my little girl Michelle. And, you know, I can't wait to be a mom one day. And that was like my favorite game to play as a little girl, was, you know, being a mom, playing with my dolls. And I remember I was in college at the time, and I was sitting in my room, and that I had that thought come over me. I was just praying, like, God, take this from me. And I remembered the desire I had to be a mother. And at the same time, I remembered that I was filled with it was like this nauseating fear. And I remember thinking, like, absolutely no way. Like, that's not in the cards for you, because I remember thinking I would be mortified if I ever passed down these tendencies and these insecurities and these addictions and these habits. Like, I wouldn't be able, it would be unmanageable for me to even handle that kind of, you know, that kind of regret and that kind of guilt. And so I just felt hopeless in that moment. And I remember thinking, I can either choose to quit fighting and believe that there's not an answer, or I can choose to fight. And so it was like that moment, I just made a choice that said, you know what, I'm going to be relentless and I'm going to figure this out. And I chose, I'm like, I want to be a mom one day, and I will, like, I better do the work so that my future daughter doesn't have to. And so it was that moment that I just chose to be relentless in trying to figure this out. And what then ended up happening was I started to learn about the neuroscience of just how our brain works and how habit pathways form in the brain. And it went from this struggle being so abstract and kind of woo-woo and out there to actually having some substance and being like, wow, like, I see what's happening here. I'm understanding what's going on in my brain. Maybe I'm not crazy. Like, maybe there's actually something happening in my brain that I can retrain. And so when I started to learn those things, everything started to change for me.
Oh, that's amazing. It was giving me chills there when you're saying that. And I think on everyone's journey, there tends to be that pivotal point where there has to be another way. There has to be another way, and that endlessly searching. So well done you for, you know, being so brave enough to step out over the abyss, if you like, you know, waiting for that, you know, that bridge to come underfoot to kind of keep going. And you mentioned the neuroscience, and it's something that on my own journey, I remember having a similar time where I'm thinking, you know, I'd cut my finger and my finger started to heal. And then, like, well, if my finger's healing, why is my inside's not healing? And then I got so far where I'd healed the endometriosis, but I was still struggling with, you know, food issues and with exhaustion and things like that. And then I knew I had to go in deeper. I had to really try and, you know, understand the neuroscience. And that is a fascinating element. And for those who don't really understand what that means, you know, the brain-body connection, And perhaps you could share a little bit more, because I think some people think, oh, is my illness or my thing, is it all my head? Like, do I have control of it? Well, no, you don't. It's subconscious. And these patterns of behavior and ways of thinking and feeling have been ingrained long before you could speak. So perhaps you could share a bit more from, your understanding of the neuroscience, because it's a fascinating element.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started to understand that there's different regions of our brain. And so we have this very primal survival portion of our brain, this lower area of our brain. And this is when I started to understand how these impulsive tendencies were created and kind of wired into me. Was I started to understand what happens when we diet, and also not only physically restrict our food intake, but when we have mental and emotional restriction, when we're not fulfilled in those areas. And so what happens in the lower area of our brain, physically, when we restrict our calories through means of dieting, is that lower area of our brain, it doesn't understand that we are, that we're willingly restricting calories for the purpose of weight loss. All it understands is that it's not getting fed. And so it sends us those impulses to eat, very strong impulses to eat, and those intensify over the period of our dieting. And the reason is, that was really important back when we were hunters and gatherers and in the caveman era, because if we didn't have those strong impulses to eat that drove us to go out and, hunt and kill and find food, we would have died off as a human race a long time ago. But today, in most modern societies across the world, we have an abundance of food in most modern societies, but yet we restrict it for the purpose of weight loss. But our brain still sends us those signals to eat. And so that's why dieting is such a challenge, because we're up against our own kind of our own biology. And so we're fighting these very primal survival mechanisms. And then we have this higher area of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, and this is kind of like our executive functioning center. And this is the area of our brain that rational thought is produced out of. And this is the area of our brain where I like to call it our true selves, like our truest selves, what we really want, our goals, when we're thinking clearly. All of this is happening in our prefrontal cortex. This is the area of our brain responsible for discipline and willpower, and the area of our brain that tells, our hand to put food to our mouth. We literally have to think about it, and so I started to learn how the brain works, and what happens is when that lower area of our brain, that impulsive survival primal area of our brain, is firing and taking over, and our prefrontal cortex is not as strong, then the impulsivity takes over. And so I started to realize, okay, there's a lot going on here in the brain that is making so much sense. And so for me, I am the kind of person that needs to understand the how and the why, like what is going on here. And I'm also a spiritual person, but understanding the science of what's going on is so important to me. And so realizing that in all my dieting, like that was actually propelling the problem forward. And I started to read different research articles and understand that dieting is actually a consistent predictor of weight gain across 95% of people who attempt to diet. It is a consistent predictor of weight gain. It has a 95% fail rate statistically. And so I started to read these things, and it all started to make sense. And I started to realize how I was not acting in conjunction or in sync with my brain or my body. And so I'm feeling like I'm weak-willed, or that I'm lacking discipline, or that I'm just broken and messed up, when in reality, I'm just fighting my physiology and my psychology and hoping that I get somewhere. So in starting to understand that, I was able to then begin to make steps to work in sync with those things. So I wasn't fighting these very primal things within us. And so, our brain is amazing when we engage in, calorie restriction, or even mental and emotional restriction, which that's a little more abstract to understand, but it's essentially this: when we feel guilt or fear around food, or shame with anything we do with food, or we judge ourselves, there is this perceived deprivation, and it can trigger the same primal response of these impulses to eat as actual physical deprivation. So when we judge ourselves when we're eating, or when we feel guilt, it's a signal to our bodies that we're doing something wrong. Yes. And so when we're doing something wrong, the next thought subconsciously is we need to fix it. And so it's like, well, I better get back on track tomorrow because what I'm doing right now isn't okay. And so we have this perceived deprivation that we're approaching, and that perceived oncoming deprivation triggers us to, well, we might as well eat as much as we can now, because there's going to be a famine, a deprivation coming up. And so it's like this Last Supper mentality. And when we engage in these types of behaviors, and we eat anxiously, and then we restrict ourselves, and we do that repeatedly, we begin to wire into we have neurons in our brain that start firing together, and neurons that fire together long enough start to wire together. And when they wire together, that's what we commonly refer to as a habit, which makes it more easy and more automatic to do the thing that our brain notices we keep doing. So then suddenly we're feeling these impulses out of nowhere. And that's because our brain thinks that we need to do this thing because we've done it so many times before. So it starts sending us these impulses to just do it. And it feels completely out of control. Like we've been hijacked. Like intellectually, we know we don't want to do this thing, yet we do it.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And even just hearing your voice tone and things, you can see how, passionate you are about this, because it had such a, control over every aspect of your life before. And I mean, obviously, I think it's interesting, the word diet in our culture as well, because I know women who come through my program, I'm not a fan of that word diet. It's a bad word because it doesn't actually signify healthy eating habits. And then there's all these connotations attached to the word, and this, as you say, kind of yo-yo thing. And I think I love what you do is you're really getting to the core psychology of what's, rather than having this conflict between what you shouldn't be doing but what you are doing, which takes up so much energy and has a profound impact on you physically. Yeah. It's really understanding, as you say, the science behind it. So from an emotional perspective, because there's an awful lot of emotion attached to eating generally anyway. You look at little babies, or you look at young toddlers, when they don't get to eat, they want to cry, and of course we know about the neurons, in the intestinal tract and stuff as well, that release, all these serotonins and things anyway. But, from an emotional perspective, how did you make that transition? I heard that you were learning more about it, and you're getting more excited, you're understanding the science behind it. So how did that manifest itself in your everyday? What was pivotal for you?
Well, when it comes to the emotional component of all of this, I think for me, it started out as an intellectual understanding of what was going on a science-based level. And then realizing I have to start changing what I'm doing, and I need to understand how my mind and my emotions are playing into this. And when I understood that scientifically, if I'm thinking X, Y, and Z thought, I then trigger this impulse to rise up inside of my brain because there's this oncoming perceived deprivation. And so I realized I had to stop. I had to practice it. Like these patterns become so habitual, but I had to start practicing not allowing myself to feel guilt or shame or fear or disappointment if I didn't eat what I deemed was an ideal or good in my book. It was like I had to stop with this idea that like there was this ideal way of eating, and really get to start believing that our intuition, our bodies will tell us what it wants. And if I can reconnect with that, because like you're saying, you look at a child or a toddler, they will cry when they're not fed, but they also lose interest in food naturally when they're full.
Yeah.
Why is it that so many of us don't even know our hunger and fullness cues? We eat way past our fullness, and we can't even tell when we're hungry. We think we're always hungry, and we don't know how to stop when we've had enough. And that's because we've lost touch with our mind and body, like having those two connected. And so I think looking back and understanding that we were born as natural, intuitive eaters, and it's like our eating habits and patterns should be as natural as breathing. Like the regulation of oxygen, we don't think about how to breathe. Like we just allow our body to do it. And that's the same way we were designed with hunger and fullness and how we should eat. It's like you just allow your body to tell you, okay, now I'm hungry. And when you eat, okay, now I'm full. And obviously we have to make choices that, you know, not only fuel us mentally and satisfy us, but also, you know, take care of us in a health way, in, you know, a health focused manner as well. And so the process really was, for me, it was, you know, just learning that all of these components are playing a role in my struggles and my impulsivity. But the biggest fear I had in doing something different than what I had always done was this fear of spiraling out of control and gaining a ton of weight in the process. Because any time that I kind of eased off this forceful control I had around food, I would spiral out of control. Like I felt very impulsive around food. But what I now know, and what I always tell the women that I work with, is it's essentially like our internal environment has become so highly pressurized by all of this guilt and shame and this structure that we put around eating and food and, you know, all these rules and restrictions, that it's like, I like to think of it as like a soda bottle or carbonated drink, our internal environment. And over the years, we just shake it and it becomes more and more pressurized. And when we decide to, you know, for a holiday or for a special event, we decide to ease off our diet or not put so many rules on ourselves. It's like we unscrew that bottle top that's been highly pressurized and it blows. And so we spiral out of control and feel like, oh my gosh, what happened? And so we go back and we screw that top on tight and we just have this white knuckle grip of control over food. When if you can begin to continue to screw that top off and leave it off and learn how to not continue to have this ever increasing, you know, pressure internally, it eventually settles. And what you're left with after all of that pressure comes out and settles is you return to balance, and you have this natural balance that just kind of ensues. And I never thought I would get to that point ever, because it always felt so out of control in that kind of pressure releasing phase.
Yeah. No, I think it's amazing. I think when we spoke before and you used that analogy of you know, the soda bottle and unleashing the cap, it's so true. And it fascinates me because I know I had a bizarre relationship with food for the vast majority of my life, but on my journey, it really allowed me to re-examine what that was. And I think a lot of women who have got endometriosis, again, they're in so much pain, they can't even really think about it, but I know there's an element of control. And, you know, and it's that word control. So it doesn't make me kind of think, you know, when I help them develop healthy eating habits. So it's not a diet, because I think it's too much restriction going. It comes back in a negative way. But it's interesting, that word control, isn't it? So where does that originate from? Is that from, you know, trying to get some control, you know, from a psychological perspective? Is that trying to get control of an environment or aspects of your life because other areas feel out of control, and that's the only area you have control? Because I know, you know, people have had eating disorders and things, and I was borderline eating disorder myself. I don't know how and why I didn't. I was on the cusp, you know, but my relationship with food wasn't great. And then speaking to lots of people like yourself and people, it's so interesting that if we've got an abundance of food in our culture now, and we get all these messages, we get these airbrushed images of women who are just so perfect, we just like want to cry when we look in the mirror, you know, and then we've got all this food presented to us, half of which either we overindulge or we don't finish, or what. There doesn't seem to be that kind of middle ground. Where is that desire for control over food? Where do you think that originates from?
Yeah, that's a great question. That comes 99.9% of the time, the desire for control and the spiraling out of control, subsequently the spiraling out of control with food and these diet binge cycles, or, you know, restrict overeat cycles. They don't start from the diet. It really starts because of these societal pressures and messages that our body doesn't fit the standard. So we feel like we then need to do something to change it. And so, and to control our food intake. So it really starts from this place of body dissatisfaction. And so if we can learn we have to unlearn so many of the messages that we receive. And so one of the activities that I take the women that I work with through is literally a visual detox, because all of this is stemming from a dissatisfaction in our own skin. The only reason we diet is because we believe that there's something wrong with our body. And so And so if we can get back to that and focus on, okay, how do we kind of retrain what's going on in our body? Because we've become so conditioned to believe what is normal and ideal is an airbrush perfect body, because the way that our brain works when we look at certain things, if our brain, there's this phenomena that our brain has, that when we look at something enough times, or a variety of things that are similar, what our brain does is it will average out what it sees and decide that is normal, that is ideal. Yeah. And so if all we look at are these images of, perfect looking women, perfect bodies, and we're using that, a lot of my women say, well, that's my motivation. And I'm like, no, actually it's causing you to have a dysfunctional relationship with food. And it's not, because your brain is deciding that is normal, that is ideal, and that's the standard. And so the visual detox that I take my clients through is, we need to unfollow on social media anybody and everybody that is causing you to even feel an ounce of comparison. And that's not to say they're bad people. Yep. It's just to say that, like, it's not healthy. It's not healthy to consume these all of
that's great you even saying that, I think, because how many of us go, oh, look at that person, look at that body, and you just feel rubbish by the time you finish. I have to filter how often I'm on social media, and as I was saying the other day, I don't actually buy women's magazines anymore because I just end up feeling rubbish. But that is wonderful. I love the terminology visual detox, because I think, I was out the other day and I was looking at all these people and all these women, and I'm like, they're not represented in magazines or on billboards or on TV. It's just a minuscule percentage of society, and everyone is then compared against. And I think women can sometimes be just as bad as men, or the society as a whole, comparing other women, noticing cellulite or noticing this or noticing that, and it's exhausting. So it's no wonder that relationship with food gets so messed up, really, and misconstrued. And I think one of the joys of when women come through my program is, not only are they eating, they kickstart their metabolism because they develop this new relationship with food, where they actually, I had somebody email me the other day and say, it's so annoying because I can't eat rubbish food anymore because my body doesn't like it. So they developed this, which was wonderful. She can't eat rubbish food. I'm like, yay. But, she's recognizing, hearing her body, hearing what she's liking, also gaining more energy, eating 3 times as much, but has kick-started the metabolism. And one lady lost 20 pounds. And she's going, how is that even possible? I've lost weight and I'm eating more. But I think the relationship with their body has changed. And what I'm hearing from you is, you abide by that same philosophy in psychology, which, we're not taught that growing up, and I think it's amazing the work that you're doing. You're ceasing that kind of ancestral messages that's been passed down through generations. I know myself, with my daughter who's 25, she did, as part of her coursework for school, was eating disorders, and the messages that social media and things give women, and it's distorted, to say the least. It's really distorted.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And it's so the pressure feels, it mounts, and we have to take a stand for ourselves and protect ourselves from these messages, because otherwise it develops these things in us, and these tendencies, and this desire or this need to control things that weren't supposed to be controlled. Because the reality is, when you try and control food, it's only a perceived control, because how often do we have this reaction of binging or overeating or the screw it mentality? So we think we have control, but it's really just a perceived control. Real control comes when you no longer even feel the impulse to binge or overeat, and there's a natural balance that is settled within, and that is 100% possible. But it starts with protecting your environment, what you're intaking visually, so that you can begin to rebuild your picture of what health really means, because it's not a number on the scale. It's so much, there's so much more that goes into what health really is. And I think most women, if they were to get really honest with themselves, they would boil it down to, what I weigh is how healthy I am. And that's just couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah, we don't have scales in our house. They're in the bin. When I moved home, I'm like, I don't even want to start that comparison, because it's unhealthy. And I think it's so great to say protect yourself, because there is so much bombarded to people now. I mean, it's like overwhelm. and then people lose their sense of who they are, their identity, not only what they think and feel, but also how they look as well. So in your programs, how do you address those issues? Do you have like a 12-week program, or what does your course offer?
Yeah. So when women come into my program, it's about 12 weeks. It depends on, where the client is at, but yeah, it's about 12 weeks in length. And basically we take our clients through a process of, one, understanding why they binge, why they overeat, like what is going on internally. And then how do we begin to unscrew that, quote unquote soda bottle, that pressurized internal environment, without spiraling out of control. Because I remember for so long, the reason that I didn't take steps forward in healing my relationship with food was because of this overwhelming, paralyzing fear that if I did, that would mean, my weight gain would spiral out of control. I'd never be happy or feel confident in my own skin. And I kind of received that message from when I went kind of the therapy and traditional recovery route. And it wasn't that, this is not to say that they weren't well-intentioned individuals that I worked with, but I kind of felt like I needed to forfeit and give up the desire to feel good in my own skin if I wanted food freedom. And so that was this battle internally for me, because I wanted to feel confident in my body, and I didn't want to feel crazy around food. And I am here for the women who have that desire and don't want to spiral out of control in the process, because that's what kept me imprisoned for so long. And the truth is, you can have both, but you have to navigate the journey appropriately so that your mental health stays grounded and intact, and that your physical health does as well. So yeah, we take clients through this process of understanding all the intellectual components of what is going on, on a brain-based level, an emotional level, a physical level, and then how do we begin to implement these mental techniques to rewire what's happening in our brain with these really strong habit pathways? How do we weaken the strength of those so that we no longer even feel this impulsiveness around food? And at the same time, how do we navigate all of this without, the soda top bottle just blowing off and kind of going crazy on food in the process? So that's the journey that I take my women on. And a lot of it has to do, we learn a lot of unique mental kind of rewiring techniques, but and we also do a lot of work with body image because of how pervasive that is and how much that propels these struggles. So we do a lot of work in that area as well.
Amazing. I wish I'd met you years ago myself, actually. I think that's the thing, isn't it? Every single woman out there is affected by that. And I know from, what you said before, there's all that support as well going through these kind of transitions, because it's that fear, as you've talked about, of letting go of what you thought was, you were trying to keep a lid on everything, but actually, it was causing more and more pressure within. Yeah. So if people want to get more information, where can they get information about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in the process of revamping our website, but I am on social media every day. The best place to reach me on social media is on my Instagram, which is at Jessi, Jessi Jean, JENNN. And yeah, that's where you can reach me on social media. And then right now I have released a free ebook that has video training elements and a workbook component for how to navigate the holiday food scene without spiraling out of control. That was an especially challenging time of year for me when I was working on evolving my relationship with food. And so I put together a really amazing resource at foodfreedomholidayguide.com that you can download. You can get those videos as well as this workbook component, so you can kind of navigate, and not just the holidays, but really just social situations and settings. And anytime there's, buffets of food and lots of people, and like, how do we navigate all of that and do so in balance, fully enjoying it without coming out on the other side feeling immense amounts of guilt and disappointment and shame. So foodfreedomholidayguide.com.
Oh, that's awesome. That's especially, with Thanksgiving and Christmas and, any time of year, even like, Valentine's Day, people day for meals. There's just so many situations where people actually dread, oh my goodness, well, what am I going to eat? And then this whole kind of psychological, mental stress. And I'm assuming as well, obviously for women with endometriosis who are listening to this, that whole body image, the whole psychology with food will have a profound impact on their health as well, and energy levels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When when you can heal what's going on mentally in your challenges with food, hands down will it affect your healing process in everything else that you're pursuing healing, because our minds are so powerful. And when you are spending so much energy consumed with thoughts of food and body worries, your brain does not have the capacity to go to work to help heal other things in your body. So it's really important to focus on this so that you have full capacity to heal other things as well.
Yeah. And I do want to say, for those who are maybe lying in bed suffering in pain, we're not saying that it's all in your head, because it absolutely isn't.
Right.
And, you know, there are different elements. I talk about the 5 Ps, the 5 poisons, you know, produce, food, you know, products like personal, household, property, environment, past, and people. So, you know, there are many layers you need to look at with endometriosis, but it is really fascinating when you start to even just, if this triggers in you this kind of like, wow, I hadn't even thought about that before. This is the purpose of interviewing Jessi here, so that you can kind of go, oh, wow, I hadn't even realized that I had an issue around food. Because I think what can sometimes happen as well is you feel depressed, or you feel like this conflict, and they might grab, like, you know, sugar, which has major, you know, impacts on your hormone levels and your insulin levels, which then compete with your progestin, which then increase more inflammation. So, you know, that whole kind of, you know, just grabbing for sugar to get that hit, you know, which does nothing for your body, doesn't feed you, and then just makes you have the sugar high and the sugar slump. So that's why I think it's wonderful to speak to people like you, and I love the work that you are doing. So thank you so much. But for those who are listening, if go and get Jessi's Food Freedom Holiday Guide at foodfreedomholidayguide.com. Also, if you haven't got your top 5 jumpstart tips from me, then you can get that free at healendometriosisnaturally.com. So wherever you are on your journey, know that you're not alone. Be where you've been, and reach out for help and support. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. But Jessi, thank you so much for being on today. It's been wonderful to meet you. And
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Hope to speak again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, Wendy.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Heal Endometriosis Naturally with Wendy K Laidlaw. And I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and rate us. If you're interested in learning more, you can download your top 5 jumpstart tips at healendometriosisnaturally.com and jump on the VIP email list. Remember to keep you number 1. The world needs a healthy you.